Hello and welcome to Journeys in Transformation Analytics. I am Amaresh Tripathy. I run the analytics business for Genpact. And with me, I have Kiran Mysore, who is the former Vice President of Operational Analytics and Insights at Medtronic. Kiran, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Amrish. Happy to be here.
And continuing on our theme of economics of decision making that we've been talking about, and we kind of discussed kind of the four themes in the earlier episode, and we already talked about the first one, which is how do you kind of the cost of the discovery of data. We want to go to the second theme today, which is the cost of ingestion. Right? Just because you have discovered the data, there's a big piece of it is how you actually go and bring and land the data into your infrastructure at some common place. But more importantly, there is a method to that madness. It's not like you just kind of identify and you bring them in. There's a structure there, and if you don't do it right, I mean, suddenly there's a way too much data to kind of go and ingest. Yes. And if you don't get the right, and if you are very selective about it, there is very narrow data that you are going to get with, so it's not very useful, or at least not this very useful more broadly. So how do you kind of we want to kind of talk a little bit about how do you kind of balance that. So Kiran, I mean, in terms of the ingestion of data and driving the cost, how have you optimized it in your prior experience? How have you balanced making sure you get the right data, but at the same time not boiling the ocean?
And that's the challenge, right, Amrish? So a lot of times when you really think about the decisions you're making, right, there's a lot of data involved. And I talked a little bit about how the importance of connected data plays into decision making. But as you really start to think about what data sets you need in terms of ingestion, it's really important to understand the right fit for use data sets. So you want to pick the data that are relevant for the decision. And the way to think about it is, I use a guiding principle, which is you start to think about your data foundation in the context of domains. And so data domains really can help you sort of narrow down the types of data sets that you need to ingest. And, I'll give you one example. When you think about inventory, for example, if you're making a decision based on inventory, the decision might require you to get maybe 5 or 6 attributes of inventory. But when you start to really think about the subsequent questions which are going to be asked, which is always the case when a decision is made, the next question comes along. It's easier to sort of get all the attributes of that inventory data set from your source system, whether it's our ERP system or such. So that way you don't incur the cost of going back over and over again. So that is one sort of design principle that I use. Another example is when you think about your human resources system, for example, you want to know how many employees are in your organization and what specific areas they reside in, and maybe you're looking at it from a risk perspective. But the more questions that get asked after the decision is made, it's easier to just get all the data attributes of your employee from your HR system. But one sort of consideration here to think about is when you get it all by domain, you also have to think about data privacy, because data privacy is a key consideration when you extract all the data sets. So just make sure that you think about those aspects of what is considered confidential data that needs to be protected and others that can be shared. So these are some considerations we have used in terms of ingesting data.
That's really interesting. So two themes that kind of just resonated. One is you think business case first, but when you actually go and get the data, try to get it by domain. But while you get it by domain, just make sure from the privacy aspect of it. Let me just dig a little bit deeper into two questions there. Let me start with the privacy one. So how do you? Is there a kind of, how did you manage the privacy? So suppose you want to kind of go, was it someone there in the organization telling you, okay, this is kind of what it is? Did you proactively reach out? Or did you have a policy of your own? How did you manage the privacy topic?
And it's a very important one, right, Amresh? So it's one that deserves some thought. When you think about privacy, chances are in most organizations you have a chief privacy officer or a leader that is chartered with protecting data assets in the company, right? And there are policies and procedures that are laid out, again, heavily dependent on the industry, right? So financial services may have a certain set of key attributes, healthcare, very similar and such. When you think about retail, there is a lot more from a customer perspective.
Right.
So In all of these decision making and your data ingestion strategies, you want to take a look at what your organization has in place in terms of protecting the data. And now, if one doesn't exist, I think it's really incumbent on you as a data leader to get the right people together to really make sure you have that conversation. And chances are, most of the time, the business function is already aware of the type of data assets that need to be secured and procured with some level of protection. So these are some strategies to use. Now, a lot of times, organizations sort of hesitate to take a big step because they're afraid that their data set will be exposed, and they sort of take a more conservative approach and protect pretty much everything. And that can also slow down progress, right? So you have to really balance the agility and the decision-making that is needed, but also make sure that privacy is considered and it is given its due credit.
Wonderful. And what's really, as we wrap this episode up, what's really interesting is data ingestion is normally seen as just, okay, what's the right tool and technology to kind of go and put in so that I can bring the data in. And the more is what's very apparent from this conversation is it's as much of as a business decision making and not as much it's a kind of just the engineering aspect of it.
Yes,
and you really have to really balance both the sides and risk actually at the same time. I mean, you have to balance all these sides the right appropriate way, so that you're obviously balancing the cost aspect of it, but you're also kind of doing it in the right way. So, but Kiran, thank you so much. Lovely talking to you on this topic and a very rich discussion.
Thanks for having me, Amaresh.